Hi, how are you? Well, welcome back. I'm just back myself from a little Scottish trip up to Alloa to the Forth Valley Feminists festival that was on, which was excellent. And then obviously I went to Glasgow for the Standing for Women event, which was absolutely massive to Kelly J. Her Let Women Speak event in Glasgow, which was absolutely blindingly successful and really enjoyable. So this video basically is an amalgamation of stuff which I'm going to put together for you, which I think is really, really important, which I'll tell you about in a minute. But I just want to start off by saying there's loads of new people who've come, and I really offer you a warm welcome. So I thought I'd just explain and recap a little bit about what the whole purpose, because it kind of seems a little bit discombobulating about what I'm doing, because the videos sort of jump around. So basically, let's just sort of back up a tiny bit. I'm an academic and a clinician, and I was a chair of governors. So the reason that there is a sort of mishmash of videos here is basically this. My mission, as I see it on this channel, is I'm operating as a kind of a translator of information, right? Because there's lots of new people turning up every day, thinking, what the hell is going on with all this, gender business? Okay, so a lot of them don't have time to or the inclination to spend time on Twitter or reading loads of academic analysis or political, whataboutery, etc. So I basically I'm trying to make that as simple as possible for you. There's also an absolute ton of trans rights activist material on YouTube. So I'm contributing, as many other people are, to leaving little seeds of the other side of the argument. But the bulk of the work that I'm doing is helping parents. Okay, so you can email me, and that's my email address. And I'm focusing on the schools issue, and I help parents ask questions, make complaints, negotiate with their schools, and tackle all of the thorny issues regarding school education and their kids. So that's why a lot of the videos are dealing with that. And as things arise, because at the moment we're sort of stuck in literally, nothing's happening. So we're, writing lots of letters, trying to put pressure on the Department for Education, etc., to take action. But so there's that. The other side of it is that obviously when you're talking to these teachers and head teachers, you need to have often extended discussions with them and have some knowledge base about the gender issues, right? So that's what the other videos are supplying, is some kind of working knowledge about some of the other points. So for instance, this one hopefully will give you some interesting points regarding not only yourself as a patient, but also to engage in those whataboutery discussions that go on all the time with family, friends, and perhaps in the school situation. So basically, what am I going to do? I'm going to be interviewing various people, and I'm going to talk about the state of the NHS and how the whole gender business has completely trashed everything that we took for granted with regards to same-sex bases. I'm going to look at the issue specifically of incapacitous women. I'm going to talk about disability and same-sex care. I'm going to look at mental health and people who are under section and how self-ID is impacting that. I'm going to talk about sexual assaults, look at language in the NHS, and I'm going to chop them all together. So that's it. I hope it's interesting. It might end up being more than one video. There'll certainly be more than one boring jumper. I hope you enjoy. Welcome back, my friend Liscap. It's so nice to have you back again.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. Nice to see you.
It's great. Look, we've met, and for those people who haven't already seen our other little recording that we did, you have to go and watch the other video where we looked at Liscap's book under her pen name Isadora Sanger, which is literally the best book that I've read about the whole issue of what's going on with transgenderism and gender identity at the moment. So you have to go and check that out. So Luke, you've agreed to have a little chat in this this compilation that I'm doing about the state of mental health issues. And you have talked in depth in your book, because obviously you're a psychiatrist by background. So I'm talking to mental health people who've been in mental health units in acute care for various experiences through their lifetime, and some of them have been incredibly distressing. And one of the things that they've talked about is that they have had to experience the real challenges about mixed sex wards. So I wanted to get your ideas about that as a psychiatrist, and also your thoughts on the further complexities of self-ID, which is now running in the NHS, and what your ideas about that were.
Okay, just slight correction. I was a psychiatry trainee because I had to retire before I actually finished my training, but I have worked extensively in psychiatry, and that would have been my vocation. So I have paid special attention to that. It is a discipline of medicine that is very close to my heart.
Yeah.
So if I may just kind of flash back slightly to being working in psychiatry, which was before this issue kicked off. I have to say, I have to admit that it never occurred to me particularly that mixed sex accommodation in hospitals is generally an issue until I went to work in the psychiatry. Even though now I know that it is an issue and that doctors are generally not aware, because perhaps nurses deal with that more than doctors. We just fly through the wards, etc. But in psychiatry, you tend to spend a lot of time on the ward. You tend to spend a lot of time with patients. These patients live there. In hospital, patients tend to come in, get treatment, and leave. Whereas in psychiatry, patients often spend some time. It can be days to weeks to months even. And in psychiatry, it tends to be that rooms where patients are sleeping can be sex segregated, or often are. And then that living spaces, where patients get to spend time during the day, are mixed sex. So even when I was working, when you would very, very rarely have anyone who self-identifies as the opposite sex accommodated with the opposite sex in dormitories, we were still seeing huge problems with vulnerable patients being taken advantage of by other patients. So, for example, I'll just use an example of bipolar disorder, where sometimes female patients can have a symptom of hypersexuality. I've even had a patient who just was compulsively masturbating continuously. Every waking moment, she would barely be able to fall asleep. She was that agitated, completely psychotic. You cannot get more vulnerable than that if you're surrounded by men. And keeping her safe on the ward was a massive challenge. In fact, she had to be segregated because there was no way of keeping her safe. But if you get to less of a vulnerability, which is still a vulnerability, which is patients who might be confused, easily led, sedated, we were seeing both sexual assaults occur when males would enter female dormitories, or sexual assaults in the mixed sex day spaces, as well as we were seeing relationships amongst patients where perhaps a manipulative patient would take advantage of a more vulnerable patient and start having a relationship on the ward. And then it becomes even more difficult because it's not just a matter of keeping patients safe, it's then a matter of breaking their heart because they might believe that they're truly in love, etc. And then it's a can of worms,
because they're often in and out as well, like communities, aren't they? They often they're not like necessarily just sort of one admission gone, never see each other again. It's often a repetitive thing, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Communities.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have patients who I've actually seen even a mature female patient take advantage of a vulnerable young male patient in terms of striking up a relationship. So it can flow both ways. So obviously in terms of sexual assault and coercion, it is the female patients who take the brunt, not just from male patients, but from male visitors, from male staff. I believe CQC inspection, a CQC report from 2018 about sexual assaults on psychiatric wards was quite stark, and it's worth reading.
Yeah.
So it, in psychiatry, it is particularly difficult to safeguard patients. And I know of countless incidents, even when the ward is separated into two wings, you still have this intrusion of males into female spaces, etc. So I would say that in psychiatry, it is paramount that truly single-sex wards are provided for female patients. And yet, I think now, when I was still working, you had just difficulty in keeping males and females separate because of just logistics. Whereas now, you're actually having a situation when men self-identify as women and they're then put into the dormitories with women, and women cannot challenge them. Women report being terrified, being abused, staff gaslighting them. It is so beyond my comprehension about what is happening now in psychiatry, that, yeah, that's kind of my position on single-sex wards in psychiatry and the current issues.
It's added in a whole new dimension to this exceptionally vulnerable population who are already often on, a section. So we're already saying that they're not able to take responsibility in many cases for their actions, and in fact, if in cases where they've committed violent acts against one another in that space, the police will often not take action because, of course, they're saying that they're not competent to. Because they are under mental health section, so they won't necessarily be investigated. And if you then add on that layer of the fact that they're not being adequately supervised because of the crisis in staffing, and you've got these mixed sex environments, and then you layer on top, self-ID, you're literally talking about an absolute, hodgepodge of horrific nightmares, because a lot of these the opportunity for violent incidents is just ridiculous, not to mention sexualized ones because of disinhibition and all of the different areas of crisis that people enter the mental health with in the first place.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think not only are people lacking ability to defend themselves or have compromised judgment due to their mental state, they're also trapped and they can't get away. So I remember, hopefully by now it's a familiar case to many of a woman who was incarcerated with psychosis and paranoia about men on a ward with a trans-identified male, very, very afraid, not just her, but other female patients and staff just basically gaslighting her, saying that there are no men on the ward. I mean, we've seen that in other reports in NHS Trust, that this is how they're dealing with such situations. And if you have then people who are like forensic mental health settings, people, like you said, who have committed crimes, who may be violent, and you have women trapped with violent men, it is beyond comprehension.
Yeah, and the traumatizing, and of course a lot of them may be there and have suffered domestic violence or sexual assaults, or have PTSD, etc.
So many women for psychiatric patients have that sort of personal history, and a lot of male patients also have a personal history of violence. So it's such a toxic combination.
So
it's very responsible.
Yeah, so if we one of the other areas that you've talked extensively about in your book was around this whole issue of institutional capture, and looking into the future in terms of how gender ideology is going to, you know, if we have any hope of trying to make any change, institutional capture is something that we have to definitely address. And it is absolutely strangleholding everything. Maybe I can draw some of your thoughts out on that to start with.
Just yesterday on Twitter, I think NHS England have proudly announced that they have gotten like a gold star from Stonewall. And it is just seeing these people double down, these people who are driving this unsafe situation in healthcare. It is NHS England, it is their policies that every trust and every healthcare organization has to comply with, that is driving self-ID. And I've personally been involved in this activism for close to 10 years. And I know very many colleagues who have also tried to lobby, tried to explain, tried to, you know, have meetings with these people to explain to them the dangers, and to see the whole organization double down in the middle of this massive scandal, both social and medical scandal, in the wake of the CQC report about sexual assault on wards and things. It is just, you know, I cannot believe anymore that these people are acting in good faith. This is a concerted effort to continue doing this to vulnerable people, to women. And I have no explanation why they're doing this, but I think we no longer can hope that we just need to explain to the NHS England that this is dangerous. They know, and they're choosing to do this. So I think some kind of higher intervention is required in NHS England. And what I would like to see is the Health Secretary get involved. I would like whatever is in the remit of current ministers needs to be acted upon urgently, because in my opinion, what the cause of all of this is Gender Recognition Act, but no single politician has the power to deal with that. What they can deal with, however, is things like repealing or removing Annex B from single-sex accommodation policy. And Annex B, for the listeners who are not aware, single-sex accommodation policy is basically declaring to patients that they will have single-sex accommodation in the NHS. And then there is an Annex B to that policy that completely invalidates the entire policy by saying that people who identify as the opposite sex, whether they're children or adults, will be accommodated according to their identity. So the Annex B invalidates single-sex accommodation policy, completely makes it unworkable. The whole thing is nonsensical. So they need to remove Annex B. They need to urgently stop NHS falsifying sex markers on NHS records. So this is a very common practice. And when you're faced with an obvious man who simply asked his GP to change his quote unquote gender marker from M to F, and the NHS England or Primary Care Support England said, oh, okay, then here is your new NHS record that has all references to his actual biological sex removed. How are you going to say no to him? Even though you can see with your own eyes that it is a man. We can recognize males, men and women. They do differ physically. And even hormone, you know, cosmetic hormonal modifications do not mask biological sex with vast majority of people. So we are now in a situation where there is yet another layer of administrative deception, which is enabling these self-ID policies. So, and for children, it is even more dangerous, obviously, because they can't actually weigh out risks and benefits of requesting this to be done to their medical record. So I think if I could suggest the way of dealing with this is to repeal the Annex B, stop sex falsification, and then we can see where we are. We then have Equality Act, we then have the single-sex accommodation policy, and we can then start helping, you know, to start providing a safe environment for patients.
I mean, I think we need to try and repeal the Gender Recognition Act. And I also think we need a public inquiry into what's going on. And I think maybe if that was to happen, then maybe we might be in a position where we could have a top-down approach looking at the institutional capture. I mean, certainly from a nursing perspective, one of the things that I notice about the Royal College of Nursing, for example. I mean, certainly in my experience, they were never someone who I was ever had any respect for. But what I see is a lot of very, very young gay activists coming out of universities. Excuse me, I've got a frog in my throat. Who essentially are captured by the universities. Then they straight out of university gain themselves positions in the Royal College, and then make table things at conference to change policy right throughout, and then there you go. That's how it starts, and it's just absolutely staggering. And then professional people who've been in the game for a very long time are actually pushed out, and we've seen that happen. Till this is done from a government level, this will not be changed, and I'm not sure the public really fully appreciate how bad it's got, really, and they still think that they're able to request same-sex care and single-sex bases. But
well, I mean,
yeah.
sorry, go on. I was just going to say, this is how the institutional capture works, really. It's to keep everyone in the dark, to demonize anyone who does notice what is happening, and to just embed these policies by stealth. And then anyone who tries to complain about it is effectively in the wrong, because allegedly these policies have been well considered, and now you have to spend a lot of time proving how well considered these policies are, what impact they have on others. They basically do whatever they want, and they present us with a fait accompli, and now we have to undo it over and over. So I agree with you. Like, one of my ideas was to have Equality Act champions put in every NHS trust to review all the policies and remove policies which are not compliant with the Equality Act. And I would say that self-ID policies, none of them are compliant.
Yeah.
But ultimately, Gender Recognition Act will have to be repealed, because it has no purpose anymore beyond falsifying people's sex. When it was brought purely because same-sex marriage wasn't legal, so that people who identify as the opposite sex can marry same-sex partners. Same-sex marriage is now legal. Therefore, this law is defunct. And but I know that it takes a long time to repeal laws. So I think whilst we are working on repeal, absolutely essential work, we also need to target whatever we can in the short term, just to start improving safety for patients, because as it is right now, it is so unsafe for many different reasons. It is just shocking. And everyday women need healthcare. Everyday women are opting out of receiving healthcare for the fear of being victimized, etc. So yeah, I'd say both approaches are important.
There's a lot of Trojan horses being used, and I think LGB issues are one of them, where they've attached T onto it in order to get a lot of this stuff in the door. And one of the issues that you talked about was GLAD, wasn't it? I don't know if you can kind of explain a little bit about how they're working and who they are.
Well, GLAD started as the Association of LGB Dentists and Doctors, but just like every other LGB organization, they've been captured with gender identity ideology, and they're now primarily pushing gender identity ideology into the NHS, which is what was basically their remit, was patients and healthcare staff, medical doctors and dentists. So GLAD right now is being used to push this conversion therapy bill, which, in my opinion, was another way for this lobby, who saw that they were losing ground on pediatric gender reassignment after, when Kira Bell case came out. It was becoming clear that, evidence was coming out into the open, healthcare professionals becoming aware that affirmation-only model is actually quite dangerous. And then conversion therapy bill was introduced to push to something that was absolutely necessary, ostensibly to ban gay conversion therapy, even though we have absolutely no evidence that gay conversion therapy is actually happening in the UK. But what they tagged on to that is that they want to forbid so-called trans conversion therapy. And what they consider to be trans conversion therapy is not immediately affirming transgender identities and immediately providing medical interventions to these people to cosmetically change their appearance. So in fact, to them, stopping affirmation only model equals trans conversion therapy, whilst at the same time completely ignoring the fact that, as we are now seeing more and more in the books and the evidence coming out of Tavistock, they're ignoring the fact that one of the biggest scandals in Tavistock was ignoring emergent homosexuality and homosexual bullying, trauma in homosexual children or bisexual children or adolescents who have previously also struggled with confusion about their gender identity, and at the completion of puberty, when they became adults, they would become normal, well-adjusted gay, lesbian, or bisexual adults. Now, these children are being caught in a net of pediatric gender reassignment, medicated with puberty blockers, which, again, instead of a pause button, which is what they like to call it, in fact solidifies transgender identity and results in something like 95%, 98% of patients progressing onto irreversible treatments like cross-sex hormones. So in fact, if you logically look at what is happening, children who would have grown up to be gay and unharmed medically are now being medically harmed and converted into quote unquote straight members of the opposite sex. Affirmation model itself is conversion therapy. It is gay conversion therapy, the biggest one we have right now. And yet GLAAD and the rest of the gender identity lobby is completely pretending, not listening, not engaging on this point at all, just pushing mindlessly this propaganda that allowing children to settle down, counseling their distress, exploring the reasons why, and just helping them grow up into healthy adults somehow constitutes conversion therapy. It is horrible, and it is also quite nuanced. And I think a lot of politicians are not quite understanding or being allowed to explore this nuance. There is a lot of emotional blackmail around it, a lot of urgency, a lot of pressure. Very contentious climate of anyone who opposes this being abused with horrible words being attached to them. Like, you just need to see how they call everyone fascists and Nazis and genocidal maniacs and whatever. It is crazy. So yeah, I think this GLAAD ought to be quite ashamed of themselves for pushing this. And they are also the one pushing this on medical schools, which feeds back to what you said before, that young people are coming out of universities completely indoctrinated into this agenda and then promoting it and forcing it onto their organizations. And I think medical schools have completely mindlessly signed up to this GLAAD initiative to promote this conversion therapy bill. And this is now being used as, oh, medical profession completely agrees with us. No, it doesn't. This is yet another example of how they have targeted medical authorities and captured them, and they're using appeals to authority to squash any critical analysis of what is happening and what they're doing.
And I'm sure that this will be of no surprise to you that this links directly into my other area, which is schools, because, of course,
yes.
The organisations are also lobbying on the issue. So I could name you someone like Place to Be as an example, which is one of the schools' mental health providers of education into schools, who also, if you look at their website, are very, very pro advocates of stop conversion therapy bans. So essentially working to lobby into schools the issue. You know, these people are very, very strategic. And of course, you've got these young adolescents, you know, with a whole smorgasbord of mental health issues, you know, and parents struggling to get them support in the community through child and adolescent mental health services. And then, of course, this, you know, positive gender-only everything else is put to bed, and it's just all gender affirmation, and there we go straight into the trans train. So, you know, we're at the point where, you know, none of these things can be separated out. So,
well, they've subverted anti-bullying initiatives in schools, you know, just like they've subverted LGB agenda for acceptance, they've subverted anti-bullying as well. And interestingly, I've explored this in the book. I've linked a couple of studies, and I think there is more out there. Homophobic bullying in particular has been linked to increased risk of identifying as transgender in children. So to subvert yet again a bullying campaign and completely ignore that homophobic bullying itself, which is still quite rife according to reports, is causing children to react to it by wishing they were not gay, essentially, which is what is happening. That is completely ignored. And now these children who react to homophobic bullying by wishing they were not gay, i.e. by pretending to be straight members of the opposite sex, that is now taken as an innate state. And anyone challenging and trying to point out or trying to ask this child, hang on a minute, where is this coming from? Do you think you could? That is now bullying. And that is the only bullying we're going to be now concerned about. We're not going to be concerned about the actual bullying that this child has experienced up until the point of declaring this identity. So yeah, it is. I mean, they're a one-trick horse in a sense that they just use force taming and reframing to suit their agenda. But I think because it can be applied to so many different areas, it all looks like novel strategy. They're just using the same strategy over and over in different contexts. But because there are so many different contexts, it's like a head of the hydra, you know, whack-a-mole. You know, you just deal with one thing and it emerges over there. And it's just it has to be the policies that are allowing this self-identification as some kind of true, valid, only valid state need to be addressed. And then it's going to be a lot more easy to just see what really is going on rather than what this lobby is telling you that is going on. And you cannot question it unless you want to be basically have rotten eggs thrown at you virtually. So.
And I think on that note, it's probably a good place to stop, because I could talk to you literally all day, but I thank you so much, as always, for your absolute brilliance. And thanks, Gab. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Isla. It's always a pleasure.